today's lesson is over rational numbers. We'll be turning fractions into decimals and decimals into fractions. In 8th grade, every number that you come across will be a real number. Real numbers are split into rational and irrational numbers. We'll get into that later in the chapter, but today we're going to be specifically looking at the rational numbers. A rational number is a number that can be written as a ratio of two integers in which the denominator is not 0. That's just fancy math words for saying any number that you can turn into a fraction and represent in fraction form is a rational number. Even whole numbers can be represented as fractions by putting them over 1. So as long as your denominator, the number on the bottom, isn't 0, your number is a rational number. Okay? Here is how you can break down rational numbers. But like I said, that's not going to be till later in the chapter. So just kind of a little sneak peek at that. But we're not going to be too concerned with that today. Now, when you represent a number as a decimal, there's two types of decimals. There's a terminating decimal, which means it ends. And there's a repeating decimal, which means it goes on and on forever, but we see a pattern. So 0.33333 or 0.232323 as long as it begins to repeat. So now we're going to talk about changing fractions into decimals and decimals into fractions. You have done this before. This is not anything new. In math, a fraction is representing division. So to turn a fraction into a decimal, all you do is divide. 5/8 means 5 over 8 or 5 divided by 8. To do that, you would put your numerator, the number on top. Numerator starts with an n. It goes inside the box. So we would just divide 5 divided by 8. And your work is shown here. Same thing here. Negative 1 2/3. Negative 1 2/3 can be rewritten as negative 5/3, but I prefer to do it as a shortcut and just take the negative 1, since that's your whole value, and just bring that down, and then turn the 2/3 into a fraction by dividing 2 divided by 3. Let's do some examples. I have the fraction 2/5. 2 is my numerator. It goes inside the box. N for numerator, inside the box. Divided by 5. Now 5 cannot go into 2, so I add a decimal and put a 0 at the end because adding a decimal with a 0 does not change the value of that 2. I bring my decimal straight up. 5 goes into 20 4 times. 4 times 5 is 20. So since I have nothing left over, my final answer is 4/10 or 0.4. Now, that's how you've done it in years past. This year, 8th graders get to use a calculator. So, let me show you how to do it on the calculator. Like we said, fractions are represented by division. So if you notice this little yellow symbol above that division sign looks like a fraction bar. So control, divide, sets up a fraction there for me. Sorry, technical difficulties. All right, so I have a 2 as my numerator and a 5 as my denominator. And if I just hit Control Enter, it gives it to me as a decimal. You are more than welcome to do that in 8th grade. Now, if a decimal is an approximation, so if I were to type 2/5 in and just hit Enter itself, it's going to give it to me as a simplified fraction. So to be able to turn it into a decimal, you must remember to hit Control and then Enter. But one of the great things about that is your calculator will also simplify fractions for you. We all know that 2/5 is the same thing as 4/10. But 4/10 is not the simplified version. So if I were to type in 4/10 and just hit Enter, it would give me my solution as a simplified version, 2/5. Okay? So, my next example, 2/3. Instead of doing it the long way, I'm just going to go into my calculator hit Control Divide, and it pops up a division symbol. So that was, again, Control Divide. And in my calculator, gives me something that looks like this. I simply type in the fraction, 2/3, and hit Control Enter. When I do that, my calculator yields 0.66667. 2/3, as most of you know, is just the decimal point 6 repeating. Your calculator is smart enough that it rounds for you. So once it runs out of room, it takes that last 6 and bumps it up one more. So the correct answer for this is 0.6 repeating. And to make sure that it is repeating in your calculator, you can highlight, you can scroll back up and highlight that 0.67 and bring it down, and you notice that number grows even more. The second part of this lesson is just turning decimals into fractions. Back when I taught 5th and 6th grade, the way that I taught this was, however many places are after your decimal, that's how many zeros are in your denominator. So since this is 0.45 or 45 hundredths, if you know your place values, 45 hundredths just means to put 45 over 100. But like I said, that little shortcut, there's 1, 2 decimal places, so there's 1, 2 zeros. So 45 over 100 has to be simplified, and like I told you earlier, your calculator will do that work for you. So when I do Control Divide, put the 45 as my numerator, the 100 as my denominator, just hit Enter, and it gives me 9/20. Okay. Next is repeating fractions. This is something new for 8th grade. There will be, I could show you the long way to do this, and that's going to be done in another video. But for today, I'm just going to tell you a shortcut. If a number repeats, put it over 9. So since this 5 is repeating, I'm going to put 5 over 9. If there are 2 digits repeating, I'm going to use 2 9s. So for instance, if I was talking about the decimal point 23232323, since there are 2 digits that repeat, I would put 23 as my numerator and then 99 as my denominator. So that secret trick is the 9 in your denominator. We went over that in class as to why that works, and there's another video if you'd like to see it after this. Okay, so let's look at some examples. I have negative 0.4 not repeating, so this is a terminating decimal, it ends. My 4 is in my 10ths place, so since my number is negative, my fraction is also going to be negative. 4 is going to be my numerator, and since there is 1 place after that decimal, there will be 1 0 in my denominator. Just add the 1 out in front, because you're always going to use 10, 100, 1,000, however many you need, but it's always a 1 out in front. And then to simplify that in my calculator, I'm going to put negative 4 over 10, and it simplifies down to negative 2 over 5. There's also another shortcut in your calculator. Your calculator will do all of that work for you on turning a decimal into fractions. All you have to do is select Menu, scroll down to number 2, number, scroll down to number 2, approximate to fraction, and when you do, you get this funky looking message in your calculator. All you have to do is put in that So for instance, if I wanted to turn that negative 0.4 into a fraction, I would put my negative sign, and make sure you notice that the negative is different than the subtraction sign. So I'm going to do negative 0.4, and then the steps like I told you earlier. Menu, go down to 2 number, go down to 2 approximate to fraction. It gives you that funky long sentence. That's just telling the calculator what it wants it to do. And you hit enter, and it gives you your fraction of negative 2/5. Okay? Now, repeating decimals you cannot do in the calculator. It will give you some crazy error message, or it'll try to approximate because you can't add that repeating bar in. So we go back to using that shortcut that we talked about earlier. Since the 7 is repeating, the 7 is my numerator. Since it's repeating, my shortcut says just put it over 9. Well, 7/9 is already in simplest form. You can double check that by putting that fraction into your calculator by doing control divide, 7 over 9, enter. It yields 7/9, meaning that that is in its simplest form. So 7/9 is my final answer. For 0.3 repeating, 3 becomes my numerator, and 9 is my denominator. That's my shortcut for repeating decimals. So when I put that in my calculator, 3/9, it yields 1/3 because I can divide both of these numbers by 3. So 3 divided by 3 is 1. 9 divided by 3 is 3. So 1/3 is how you represent 3/9 as a simplified fraction. Okay. Lastly, we're going to talk about mixed numbers. You treat these the same as you do fractions. The only thing is you have to make sure that you carry over your whole number. So for 1.8, 1 is my whole number. So it's just going to be that first number I put out in front. And then 8 is 8/10, so you can put 8 over 10 and simplify that. Or, like I said in your calculator, you can do 1.8, menu, number 2 for number 2 approximate to fraction, and it's going to tell you that 0.8 is the same thing as 4/5. Which mentally, if you put 8 over 10 and divide both of those by 2, you get 4/5. So that's the same math that you've been doing in the years past. It's just a little bit quicker with the calculator. The reason they let you use this calculator in 8th grade is because this is only a piece of your problems. And so instead of taking all the time to simplify and do this, the calculator does that quickly for you, computes that for you. So lastly, I have -1 and 29 over 40. So -1 is still going to remain -1. Then I add my decimal, and 29 over 40, I can just do control divide. 29 over 40, control enter, and it gives me 0.725. So my -1 comes over from the whole value. I just take this number right here and bring it over. And then 29 over 40 is then 7